Hello, today I'm going to be painting this mountain scene with a little stream and a bunch of trees and a few rocks at the front. I'm painting in Procreate on my iPad, and most of the time you'll see me using the select tool, and I don't use many brushes. The only brush I use is the technical pen when the details get a little bit small. So to start off, I'm making some big shapes to find out where everything's going to go from back to front. I have a simple checklist in my head, and I do roughly the same every time. I'm going to have some mountains, a stream, some fields, some rocks, some trees, and some little details like flowers. So the checklist is roughly the same, and clouds in the background, etc. So I approach pretty much every painting like this the same, so it gives me a process and there's less guesswork. So I'm blocking in the big shapes, and we've got each one on each layer, so I can make sure when I put the highlights on top, they stay within that area. So I'll use a mix of clipping mask or alpha lock-in, which means using both of them pretty much do the same thing. It'll mean that the colors above the layer below, it will stay within those ranges, so it makes it nice and easy to put color over the top nice and quickly. As you can see, I paint very fast. This is mostly speeded up 2 times, but I paint quickly anyway. It helps me stay loose and make things up as I go along. If I slow down, things get a bit robotic and doesn't look so free-flowing. It takes a bit of time to get used to doing this, and you'll probably make, if you try this out, you'll probably make some ugly looking shapes to start with, but you'll get used to it. So once I have the big shapes in, you can see I'm already starting on the mountains in the background, adding details. So basically what I do is have the dark layer and then gradually get lighter. I'll only do this 2 or 3 times, mostly to keep it simple. The more layers I do, obviously the more complicated it gets and the more realistic it gets, and I'm not really going for realism, so I try to keep it to maybe 3 maximum. So we'll have the dark, medium and light. Sometimes I'll do a little highlight here and there, but nothing major. So I'm working on the back fields, so make sure so that grass is effectively the same color as the front. You can see in the finished painting, but because the everything that goes into the background gets lighter and desaturated, a simple way is to decide which grass color you want up the front, and then using the color picker, desaturate and make it lighter, and that will be the same color in the background. It's always good to shift it a little bit colder as well, but that's kind of optional. You can see right now that the grass at the background doesn't blend in with the mountains yet. That's because it's probably too light and a bit too colorful. But I'll get to that in a bit. It's best to go around the painting bit by bit and not dwell on an area too long, because they all interact with each other. So I make sure I go back and forth on little bits around the painting and tweak each as I go. So I don't finish the mountains, then finish the grass, then finish the water, because they all relate to each other. And bouncing back and forth, you got more chance that they'll keep some sort of harmony. Otherwise, you'll have to go and change too much. So as you can see right now, the grass up front looks nothing like the finished painting. So I try not to worry too much about the colors early on, because I don't really know what colors I want them to be anyway, and until parts of the painting kind of get finished, I don't really know. So it's more about how light and dark they are, not so much the colors. So I can change the colors later, and you can see obviously I have. And so working from the back, I add some detail. Very rough. It just shows that there's distant trees and And one trick to the trees is make sure they kind of have different shapes on the floor, so you can tell it'll make it look like there's lots of hills and dips and whatnot, just because of the trees go at different angles, and sometimes they curve, so it tells you that's on a hill. So you don't actually have to draw the hill. The trees will tell you it's a hill because of the way they're on the floor. So it's a nice little trick to get lots of detail at the back without actually painting any. So I love painting rocks. I've painted them many times, and one trick to the rocks is make sure they're not separated. They come in bunches, and if you look in real life, they're always come in bunches. There'll be one by himself now and again, so you can see I got a few. That's okay, but make sure they come in bunches. So what you want to do is just draw a rock shape and then draw another one right over it and another one right over it, and just worry about the highlights later. Just get the shape right. So the shape of rocks are kind of ugly, but all they really are rocks on top of rocks on top of rocks. So just try and bunch them together and don't have too many gaps in between, or it'll look a bit strange. If you try it out, you'll see what I mean. So for the water highlights, there's one thing to keep in mind. You'll do one or two, three highlights on the water. So take your time making the highlights get brighter. Don't go from dark to bright immediately. You need to go slowly. And one thing to be careful of is don't put the highlights all the way to the edge. So as you get out to the edge, the water gets darker when it meets the land, because the land usually, not always, usually casts a shadow on the sides of the water. So make sure you leave some dark areas. It can't all be light. So this is one of the rare times I use a little technical pen. It's just a hard little brush. It doesn't really matter. But using the select freehand tool is too small sometimes. The details are too small and it's hard to make shapes. So if you try this out and you struggle to make shapes with the tool, it's probably because you're trying to do small shapes. Now it takes a little getting used to do really small shapes, and you'll see me doing them sometimes. But if you can't do them, just swap to a hard brush. Don't worry about which brush. It doesn't really matter. All the basic ones will do. Now I'm putting in some bushes or trees, or I think these are kind of bushy. I guess they could be trees, really. It doesn't really matter. One thing to pay attention to with bushes, again, is the shape. And again, they come in bunches. So overlap them a lot. And when you're choosing the base color, the most important thing about the base color is actually not the color, is just make sure it's darker than anything else that's on the floor. So anything that sticks up vertically is much darker than whatever's flat, because the sun can't hit it as well. So just make sure you keep all your verticals quite dark. So that's why the mountain is quite dark and the trees are quite dark. Always anything vertical. And if you had buildings, the walls are quite dark, and then the roof is very light, because the sun is shining right down on everything. For the clouds, there'll be 3 stages. There'll be a dark, mid-tone, and light. Now, most of the time when I do this, I get the separation between dark, medium, and light wrong pretty much every time. And you can see in the finished painting, it looks nothing like what I'm doing when I'm actually making the painting. So I don't concern myself with getting it too right, because you'll see if you go to tools and you go to HSL, I think it is, hue, saturation, lightness, brightness. I don't know, you'll work it out. And then you can change the lightness and the saturation and make them right after the fact. It's much easier than trying to nail it the first time. So now you can see they look like the finished painting now, because I've made them lighter, and it's squashed the medium color, which was probably wrong, into closer to what the bright version is, and then it just looks right. So don't be afraid to tweak things. I usually just get an approximation of the colors and the lightness, and then I'll change them afterwards. It's much easier than trying to get it right the first time. So the concept's pretty much the same for every part of this painting. So I'm onto the trees now. Again, it'll be a dark, a medium, and a light, and just be very wary of consistency of where the highlights are coming from. Even the mid-tones, so you've got the dark, the mid, and the light. So the mid has to be in the correct direction compared to where the sun is coming from. So the sun's coming from the top right-ish. So it's not about how well you paint some of these shapes, or all of these shapes really. It's more the consistency, that everything is pointing in the right direction. So try and keep in mind where the sun's coming from. And quite often I make a mistake and forget and do it the wrong way around. But make sure everything, so if it's coming from top right, make sure everything bottom left-ish is dark, and you don't put too many highlights in there. You can put one or two because that'll make it more interesting. Just don't go overboard. So you'll notice, hopefully, I have everything dark left on everything pretty much. Other than flat tones, flat planes, sorry. That's, that's kind of consistent then. So now I'm entering detail phase, where it's basically just like texturing and overlapping. Overlapping is a good technique to make your painting have more depth. So when we look at things and we can see that something overlays something else, we can immediately work out that things are behind other things. So the more overlap you have, the more we can see distance easier in a flat painting. So we can see like there's rocks behind rocks in front of bushes and grass blades, and then there's trees, and then the trees are in front of the mountains, and then the mountains in front of the clouds, etc. So our brain can easily work out like this is very far, this is miles or something. But we can only do that because of the overlapping. Now, if you're not careful, as a beginner, I did this too, is you have a tendency to make everything neat and line up and not overlap. So you're so busy trying to make the shape that you'll put shapes next to other shapes rather than in front. So keep an eye on that. And it's always good when you put things on top of things. So do as much of that as possible. I haven't really seen a case where you do that too much. So keep on doing that if you can. And you can do other things too to make it even more overlappy. Like you can put man-made things makes overlaps really good. So you could put like a telephone pole or something, or a bunch of fences or a sign, something like that. And they really help to make the depth look really good. So I've done that in the past. But now we're just getting to some of the details that don't really change the painting. They're just fun, and if you like to do them, do them. They're not really going to change the painting a great deal, not unless they're high contrast. I'm going to change these flowers to pink in the end because the red's a bit too powerful, but that is really just kind of up to you. They could have been blue, yellow, green, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It could be white. It's not really going to massively change the painting. It's just a bit of fun at the end. But again, I'm putting some shadows underneath these to make them look like they're on the floor. You can use black and then just drop the opacity to the other layer so it blends in with the floor. I like to put little details at the end, so I'll just create one layer right up the top and then finish off with little details. And sometimes I'll use the selector, and sometimes I'll use the technical pen when they go small. And so now I'm just finishing off. Now this really is just fiddly time, and I know when I start doing all these little fiddly shapes, there's probably time to stop, and because they won't really add anything to the painting as such, and you could probably do this for hours and hours, but that's not a good idea because it's not really gonna improve the painting. The painting is what it is now, and you kind of just got to be happy with that. So I'm going to wrap this up now, and some little details here and there with the snow, but this is basically it. So if you found this useful, subscribe and give me a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.